Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about titles. So let's get into it. So the question in question today was, Frederick, I see many web developers use the job title software developers even though they only work in web. How do you define what a software developer is, and what's the difference between a software developer and a web developer? And the short answer is that for most intents and purposes, the title itself isn't all that important. Now, let me explain that a little bit. So, there's definitely a difference between a software developer and a web developer. It's just that most people don't actually take the time to make a difference between the two. And the reason why we don't do that is because, frankly, there's such a range of tools and niches within IT that most people just don't bother. Usually the way that it goes is that if you say that you're a software developer, most people will assume, I'm not saying that that's always right, but they will most of the time assume that you are a web developer. If they're even the slightest bit unsure if you're a web developer or if you're something else, they're going to look at your skills. They're going to look at the languages that you list, the things that you know, the places that you have worked, in order to form themselves a picture of what you actually know. And see, this is the thing about titles. If you can't create a very clear and nice box around your title and the thing that you're supposed to be doing, it's very hard to label you as something. Now the problem is actually very fundamental, because even if you were to say that you're a web developer, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that you're a backend developer, a front-end developer, a DevOps person? Like, where do you draw the line for, like, how do you define yourself? So as I said, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing to do, but it's what most people actually do. Now, the main time, or rather, there's two situations usually where people make a more niched distinction between their titles. And the first time is going to be when they want to express that they're highly specialized in something, which is it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do in that situation. And the second thing is that they want to express their seniority in some fashion, or their level of experience, if that makes sense. So when it comes to specialization, usually the way it goes is that if you wanted to be sure that you express towards recruiters and future employers that you are a niched type of developer, you will put something in your title that states that you are a niched type of developer. Example would be a WordPress developer, a game developer, a front-end developer, something like that. You're specializing in something very specific, let's call it the community-wide accepted term for the thing that most people associate with that title. I hope that makes sense. You're basically just trying to say that, if you're a front-end developer, you're focusing on front-end related technologies within the web context, and you're not actually so interested in back-end development or something like that. Which is, of course, also a very interesting thing, because if you say you're a front-end developer, I could, if I wanted to, interpret that as that you are a mobile developer, because that technically is the front-end for some type of backend, usually, unless you don't have a backend of some sort, but that's very common. But we, for community reasons, decide to say front-end developer if you're a web developer and you work with the UI, and a mobile developer if you work with mobile, which you can of course also slice down and say, oh, you're an Android developer or an iOS developer. So like all these titles, guys, they really only mean, like, it's just a way of being more specific about what you're focusing on. But even that, I promise you, is not going to be enough for someone to figure out, oh, you know these sorts of things. It's just going to help you get matched towards something a little bit more niched than the general thing, which is software developer and so forth. And so for some of you, this is going to matter, and for some of you, it's not going to matter. An example where it really matters is if you're a games developer, because game development is a very specific area of programming, and it's not that fun to say that you're a software developer and then get matched or bundled together with all the other developers, and then get tons and tons of calls for job positions that isn't game related in some fashion. And as I was saying, the other scenario is when you are trying to express your seniority or your level of skill of some sort, where you usually see people say that, oh, I'm a junior developer, or I'm a mid-level developer, or I'm a senior developer, or I'm a principal developer or something like that, or a tech lead or so forth. Like you have these various titles that, in essence, well, at the very least up until tech lead, the range there between, where you actually have developer in the name or programmer or something like that, it's really only indicating like your perceived, or rather how you perceive your own skill or your own experience level. What's interesting about that is that that is highly subjective as well. You can say that you are a senior developer, and in one company that's going to be true, and in another company they're just going to look at you, you're kind of like, it's kind of weird because you don't have the skill levels or the experience level that they perceive a senior developer what they should have. So my personal recommendation in this scenario is to just go with software developer. Like, just don't even prefix or suffix or whatever you're like, don't add something to your title unless you know for a fact that you sort of fill the requirements for the general consensus, at least, of what the requirements are within your region, because otherwise it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, guys. The one time I would argue that it might make a difference is if companies are looking for a senior developer, because a lot of them are looking for senior experiences. But if you say that you're a software developer, and hopefully they're smart enough to understand that they can't just search for senior developer when they're looking for talents, because that would be really stupid. And they probably are just looking for software developers. They're still going to look at your CV, they're still going to look at your years of experience and so forth. It doesn't really matter if you call yourself a senior. I mean, I've seen developers who've been working for 20 years who are calling themselves software developers, and then you have people who have been working for 3 years and they call themselves senior developers. So what I want you to take away from this is basically just that titles, like, people kind of do what they want with these titles, guys. There is no one who can tell you, or there should be no one out there who can tell you what the difference is between a senior developer and a principal developer. There is no hard divide. There's no way to tell what the difference is. Junior developer versus mid-level developer. Well, that's also very hard. These titles usually just are. It's just the way that the community in IT have decided to structure things to try to segment different experience levels or niches within software development. And for the most part, if you call yourself a software developer, that's going to be fine, even though that technically is not as accurate as it should be. But as I was saying, the reason why people are doing it is simply because even if you have the most perfectly formulated title in the world, that by itself is not going to be enough for someone to figure out what you actually know, because within that title there's a range of different options that you could split and pick and choose from. So it's practically impossible to figure it out based on the title. So usually what people do is, as I said, they're going to look at your title, and then they're going to look at the stack, the list of tools that you are listing and the previous jobs that you have, to create a holistic picture of you and your skills. Have a great day.